Hi there, Marcus here from All About Marquetry. Thanks for rejoining us. Now, a little while back, I did a little video on my top 5 marquetry tools. And although it was okay, I took a step back and I thought, wait a minute, it's probably ideal for people who are intermediate or know a little bit about marquetry or who already have some tools and equipment. And therefore collecting the top 5 or these top 5 tools will be a benefit. And then I realized, I thought, wait a minute, what about the people who are probably just starting out in marquetry? Why would those 5 tools be important to them? So that's what I'm going to address in this video, all the pros and cons and the reasons why. Let's get at it. Number one is the scalpel. Surgical scalpel blade from Swan Morton. Now I use Swan Morton number 3 and I've used it for years and years and years, more or less since I started marquetry, and I always find that the number 3 is well balanced. It's very precise, it's got good control, but it's not just the holder that's important, it's also the knives that you use. Now I have here a 10A, I think there's a close-up up there, and an 11 blade. 10A and 11, and that's where they are. And these are the tools, or these are the knife blades that I use in the number 3. Now I don't use a number 4. I think it's just too big. I mean, look at that, it's massive. And look at the blade. I mean, people say that they use this blade for cutting veneers. You might as well use, you've got better chance because of the angle attack. You've got a better chance of cutting veneer with a pizza cutter. Have a look at the angles. I don't know if I can do a video on that later, but the angle of attack for this to be more effective for the number 4 is too high. Whereas the blade on the 10 and the 11 is a lot more natural. You've got a lot more control, a lot more natural sort of slicing, so the angle is more precise. Whereas this one, which is this blade, you've just got to be too far up. Otherwise, like I say, you're cutting on a curve. And if you cut on a curve with very difficult timbers, like oak for instance, you're going to come off the racks, you're going to come off the rails very easily. You need a very precise point to do your cutting. So the Swan Morton number 3 surgical scalpel blade is my preference of choice. Is my preference. Now on the courses that I set up, I do knife technology and I go into all the different knives that you can use. Because of course a scalpel or a surgical scalpel might not be comfortable for some people. But it's definitely my number 1 tool. Okay, number 2, here we go, is the metal ruler. The reason why I like the metal ruler is, well, there's a difference between marquetry and parquetry. Marquetry is like 3-4 inch shapes and curves and forms, whereas parquetry usually is like chessboards and checkers and other geometrical forms where you need a very sharp, straight edge. But more importantly than anything else is that you need a straight edge when you're matching or when you're putting 2 sheets of veneer together. That edge has got to be perfect, it's got to be good, so that when you put those two veneers together, there's no gap in between where the glue can seep through and spoil and ruin all your work. Although the groundwork or the ground veneer or the base veneer is very, very important, because okay, your marquetry goes on top, but it's very important because that is a subliminal effect of the background, and therefore it can also be very decorative and very subliminal, almost sort of having an effect on the overall theme. So having those lines perfect is extremely important. And to do that, we use a metal ruler. So, I mean, the metal rulers I use are very thick and chunky that I use. I do have a very thin one here, a very small one. I don't use it that much. It's good to have in your pocket on hand if you've got to make some small adjustments. But the reason is that because it's very thin, the knife can sometimes jump over the top of the edge and then either go into your fingers or go into the metal itself. Whereas the thick rulers that we have here, they're a lot better at sustaining that sort of pressure and that downward force without it jumping out. So metal rulers, 300, 500. If you don't have metal rulers, don't worry about it, okay? If they're expensive, because you're paying for all the measurements on the ruler that most of the time I don't use, go and get yourself a metal bar, an aluminium metal bar. Just check it before. There's notes on the course that I do that talks about how you can find metal bars, what to look for, how to maintain them, all the interesting stuff that is connected to metal rulers. But just check it that it's straight, because the straightness, that true, is where the perfection is. Now I see some people cutting marquetry with plastic rulers or plastic protractors. I wouldn't. It's the same thing as the little thin one here. They have a tendency to jump up and then go into your hands. You know, in the worst case scenario, you start to cut away at this edge and it starts to become imperfect. But I will say protractors and plastic rulers are ideal to get a 45 very quickly, or to do transfers or tracing. Because if you've got a very complicated design, you're drawing around it over the lines, you can see what's underneath. Whereas if you use a metal ruler, as you're doing lines, you've got to pull it aside, look around, draw, pull it aside. But these are ideal for doing traces for the beginning of your marquetry design. So number 2 on my list is the metal ruler. It's so useful and it's an advantage to have. Okay, coming in number 3 of my top marquetry tools. It's a headset or zoom glasses. It's a no-brainer really, because what it allows you to do is to get up close and see where your knife is and see where your cut line is in the veneer. Now, it is a no-brainer because this thing cost me like 10 euros. It's lightweight, it's got light settings, you can see what you're doing, it's got interchangeable lenses, so you can go stronger and stronger and stronger. It's easy to adjust, and once you've got it on, you've still got your 2 hands. You've still got your 2 hands to use, and when you've got it with your knife, you can see the tip extremely well. I was doing a cut just a few days ago on a very dark wood, and I didn't do enough cut lines through. And you know, I struggled with the light I had on me to actually see what I was actually cutting. I put these glasses on and I was there. You'll be amazed of how easy and how helpful headsets or glasses or lenses do to help you get up close to see where you're cutting. They're extremely helpful. I can assure you, they're definitely worth an investment. And that's why they're number 3 on my list, because they are so helpful and I use them a lot. Now, number 4 on my list are tweezers. I use tweezers for sand shading. It's a decorative effect that you can do or use on your veneer to create a 3-dimensional effect, like it's shaded, like it's in the shadow. And to do that, you have a pan, hot sand or a heat source that then warms up the sand that makes it very hot. And then you use your tweezers. Here, look, click. That's the advantage that I like with these tweezers. They click in. So you click it in and then you can dip it into the hot sand, keeping your hands quite away from all the heat that's going to come off that, because there's a tremendous amount of heat that's generated that comes up, that comes around the side. And if you're up close using a really small and dinky one, you'll find that it becomes uncomfortable. It's very hard to work. Now the advantages with these things over, just because you can get cheaper versions too, is that you can easily drop it. It's in the hot sand, so what do? You instinctively get in there to grab it, which is fantastic. I'm glad you did that. But the chances are is that you've picked up some hot sand and it's got right underneath your fingernail and you'll be in pain. You make a mess. So yes, you can use cheaper versions, but if you want, I would definitely use the clicking one from the surgical tweezers. Long ones to keep your hands out of the way from the hot. And I'll tell you what, that is why they're my number 4 on my top marquetry list. Now, for my top 5th marquetry tool is the veneering push stick, which is such a little tool like this. It's been handmade. What it allows you to do is to push in veneer that needs to be glued in or needs to be pushed into veneer without damaging the surface too much. And also, because of the surface here is a lot wider, allows it to keep it very flat. Now the usual thing that you can do if you're doing marquetry, you will use your scalpel, your knife, you will cut, you will replace it, and then what you do, you flip over the handle, and then you use the back of the blade to push in the veneer like so, which is okay. But sometimes, you might drop 1 or 2 on the floor and they get damaged here. And what you find yourself doing is scratching the veneer as you're pushing it in, bruising the veneer, which isn't what you want. It's an easy option, but of course what I prefer to do is to use this veneer push stick to push in my veneer, my marquetry. It's good if you're using glue because you keep it very, very flat. And if the glue does come out, sometimes I rub some wax on here so it doesn't start to get onto my actual push stick itself. So it just flakes off. This is my 5th top tool for Marquetry Tools. Now, bonus top tool, as you might say, for me is the cutting board. It's a very sort of like, let's say, silent hero in the marquetry field. It's something that gets overlooked. Now, these are I have about 3 or 4 of these things. You can get bigger cutting mats, and I would advise you to probably get one of those. These are great when you're on the road, when you need to go somewhere. They can go into a backpack, they can go into your toolbox, and they're good if you're doing jobs on locations. But also they're ideal for in the house or in your little workshop. They're not too big. I have found these to be extremely useful. What do they do? Well, you can say, well, I'll use my MDF board underneath, I'll use my multiplex ply board and I'll cut through and use that, which is fine for small projects. But what these boards do, they allow the knife to go through, but they don't allow the knife to deviate like wood would do, or let's say what could happen with MDF. See, if the knife cuts through the veneer, it tends to sort of like still poke through, and if there's grain or something for it to fall into, it will throw off your work. The main advantage that I like about it is it's soft. It's very forgiving for the blade. So if the blade does cut into this, it's like a softer material. It doesn't blunten the blade. So it is a real support to have for your veneer to go on top of when you're cutting. Now I do some lesson notes in the course which talks about this a little more in detail, but that basically is it in a nutshell. If you're going to do marquetry, get yourself, or do yourself a favour, get yourself a cutting mat. It'll save you a lot of hassle later down the line when you're doing fine, precise work. And I do believe that sums it up for my top 5 tools here on All About Marquetry. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you in the next one.